Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Outcomes Rocket. Saul Marquez here, and I am welcoming Zoe Brown and Sandy Richardson back to the podcast on this topic of competitive readiness. We previously covered the increasingly complex and competitive healthcare market and the challenges that organizations face. And Zoe and Sandy really did a great job on part one, sharing how competitive strategy can really become a challenge inside of organizations, some of the burdens that happen with it, the comforts, the false comforts that we see with information overload. In today's episode, we're going to be diving into more the solution side of things. So with that, I want to welcome you both back, Sandy and Zoe. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Of course. So last time we met, as I had shared, we discussed the challenge of information overload and how actually that could create a comfort blanket, as you guys called it, for organizations. What do you feel are some of the ways to address that?
Perhaps sounds ever so simple to say this straight off the bat, but oftentimes when you're looking for the right answers, or at least making progress towards the right answers, it goes back to asking the right questions. So I often find myself having conversations with clients, just asking some very straightforward questions. They may be inundated with data, have extensive information, but challenging then on what are you doing with it? What does it mean? Why is it important? Which of the plans and internal behaviors might that have changed? And some of the answers to those questions might not be immediate, but that in itself just illustrates that information alone is not sufficient. So clearly the solution lies elsewhere and there's more steps to be taken. But yeah, that's the simple answer is asking a simple question often.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that, Zoe. And I think an important first step for any organization to consider is, what mechanisms are or should be in place, firstly to identify what's important. It's that kind of seeing the wood from the trees analogy. And secondly, to develop the useful competitive insights that will be of genuine value to internal stakeholders. I think it's also important to recognize that competitive readiness is not the sole preserve of the global teams. And it can be really quite important to try and create a two-way dialogue between the global and local teams. Because such an approach does many things. It helps to secure the engagement of the country teams who ultimately are going to be the guys responsible for executing some of this competitive response. And it allows the global team to harvest insights from the grassroots and not rely, as we said, I think mentioned the last time, on the views of quite a small group of key opinion leaders. And I thought at this point it might be good to just talk about a case study in a way where he's been supporting a number of clients to develop regular competitive readiness clinics. These are essentially monthly or quarterly working sessions, allowing global and local teams share their latest respective competitive intelligence, to collectively discuss the implications and then work together to co-create an appropriate cross-functional response plan, and a plan that gets executed because it's a shared plan. It's a shared plan. Everyone's had a chance to contribute. Such programs help to keep competitive readiness at the forefront of the global and local level teams. And it avoids the need to be reactive, to have late responses or reactive responses to a threat that probably was always coming down the road.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, again, it goes back to some of those simple questions to ask being an essential part of your insights gathering exercise, the challenge that you undertake. It is simply to ask, why is that important? Because if it isn't, then it isn't an insight. And fundamentally, you're just adding to the white noise that exists internally, externally, and it becomes non-helpful. So you have to filter and focus on what's important. And I think another thing I would add is one of the really interesting parts of that information distillation process is how working through the landscape and the context, a new market entry may actually quite fundamentally change what that landscape looks like. And importantly, change what become the market value drivers in that landscape. So it's a very simple example, but particularly for brand teams who have enjoyed market dominance, it can be really easy to think that they know the landscape, they know the market, they know their customers, they know what's driving choice, but the competition then changes that. So in a world where efficacy drives choice at the compromise of side effects, there is the assumption that side effects aren't important. Well, not necessarily true. It's just we are operating in an environment where we haven't had the privilege of choice. So a new entrant that offers a similar efficacy profile, but with a side effect profile, suddenly side effects becomes an important part of the decision-making process. Now, as I say, a very simple example, but something we encounter very frequently. And I think it really demonstrates the point. And even very seasoned and experienced teams struggle with that disconnect because they are almost over familiar with the market and have to understand that that's evolving.
For sure. And I really like this approach that you guys take. This idea of these workshops that isn't just a one and done, but you're actually coming in monthly or quarterly. So it becomes part of the organizational cadence, so to speak. Have you guys seen that makes a difference versus a one and done project having this cadence?
I think that, yes, it does make a difference because it helps to embed the behavior within the organization because it's done regularly. It's a shared activity. It's got that global local axis, and it ceases to become a once a year tick box exercise.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love that. It's something for us to keep in mind. These types of things, we get busy in our organizations and you don't have to do it on your own. Like you could lean on a partner like Lumanity to come in and work with your operational rhythms to embed it and not have it be a workshop that just you do and then dies on a shelf. So you guys have worked with and supported teams to consider what drives choice and distill implications of information. What now?
I think one of the things we have to understand is the art and science, if you like, of competitive planning is that it's never an exercise in precisely predicting the future. If we could all do that, we'd be down the shops buying a lottery ticket. We can look at indicators, of course, factors such as historic competitive behavior. We can look for clues in press releases and investor communications. We can seek to understand their phase 2 programs and critically the decisions that were made between phase 2 and phase 3 in terms of that critical last stage study design, what endpoints were chosen, what's the design of the trial. So we can look for indicators, but there's never going to be complete certainty about the future. However, organizations cannot wait for certainty to appear, and they have to plan now and be ready. So the question there is, how do we reconcile uncertainty with the need to plan and act? Yeah, one of the things we recommend in a lot of these processes is the adoption of a scenario-based approach. We can focus on a manageable number of potential future realities, which allows the client to stretch their thinking and explore various different what ifs, if you like. But the art is not to go too crazy here, but to keep it focused on a manageable set of realistic possibilities.
Yeah, I think that's a essential step in the process is not going too big, too broad, and keeping it simple, really. You cannot plan for 100 different future possibilities. You can't do it. And even if there were going to be 100 different nuanced situations, the reality is you're not going to prepare or plan uniquely for those. And I think that's a really important part of the client dialogue that we have is ambiguity can be quite overwhelming, right? Particularly to Sandy's point, it's not like you can wait for that certainty. So there's all these sort of what ifs going around, and there's a real pragmatism that's needed there to create focus within the organization to think, actually, what are the things that are going to generate action? What are the things that are different enough that allow us to plan differently? So firstly, irrespective of future variables, what are the specific actions that need to be taken? And then what are the specific actions that perhaps are going to be contingent on specific future scenarios. And that gives you then something very tangible and focused, and not only removes that ambiguity, but it removes that sense of overwhelm by being focused and being pragmatic. And I think we spoke previously when we met around this challenge of prioritizing today, because we're also focused on that burning platform. And if it looks like there are 100 different things to get right today, to be prepared for further down the line, then it's just going to lead to inaction. It won't happen because it doesn't correlate to what's on the sort of list of must-dos today. So you will have lost the battle if you're making it overwhelming in that sense, because you will have lost team engagement. And I think, as we spoke about with the challenges as well as the solutions, the team engagement piece is absolutely critical.
For sure. Definitely. I'm hearing themes here of team engagement, buy-in across the organization. Tell me more about that. Why is this engagement piece important? And what do we do about it?
And to me, it's the magic ingredient, right, that organizations can get right, because there are plentiful processes, plentiful frameworks, but people engagement is key. That's what turns that into success. Engagement in the challenge, realization in the challenge. You need to have that level of buy-in and sort of behavior change. And there will be no success without that. Even if you academically have the best process and framework that existed, it is going to rely on the team to execute that.
Yeah, I agree. People need to get engaged. Teams need to get engaged. And it's a matter of coming together with a focused goal and trying to simplify. Teams really need to align on collectively together as a cross-functional team what really matters to them, and work together to distill that, and not just develop an endless shopping list of possible actions. And that needs to be a collective process. It also needs to be an individual process. We need to think, what are the 3 things that I need to do as a result of these competitive insights that we're generating? It can be 3, it can be 2, it can be 1, it can be 5. But the one thing it shouldn't be is 100 things. Because quite frankly, 100 things won't get measured and 100 things won't get done.
Yeah, I mean, I would completely echo that point. And we all have been around the table in meetings and attended workshops and so on, where there's a lot of nodding and everyone agrees in principle with what's been developed, and there's a seemingly agreed to plan in place and it makes sense. And there's that sort of organizational team buy-in, but that word you use, I, is essential to make it happen. So it can't be ethereal. You have to think about the individual accountability, and for each individual to be able to say, yes, actually, I am personally needing to act differently in my role, in my function. These are the things that I am going to do. And unless you have that accountability all the way through to the individual, as Sammy says, it just won't get done.
For sure. And driving that ownership, I guess that's where the I comes in, right, guys? Who's going to own it once the workshop's over? I mean, we've all been in those rooms. Zoe, you said it, right? All right, we have this great plan. And then you walk out of the room and you feel good about it. And then the first fire that comes up the next week throws everything to the side. Ownership is key. So in practice, how do you both find that you could support organizations to get to where they need to be on this topic?
Yeah, we can help organizations to develop and embed robust competitive readiness programs that ensure that kind of full cross-functional team engagement. And just to pick up on a point you just made, one of the things we try to do is end these sessions with a real action-orientated close, and try to get as granular as possible in terms of saying, this function needs to do this by this time, so that there's clear responsibilities as to who needs to deliver what, and there's a timeline associated with it. And that's partly something that we need to ask companies to do, is to give sufficient time in these processes, not just to identify problem, but to properly workshop the solution. So I previously mentioned the establishment of kind of routine program of CI sharing workshops. But I think one of the most impactful exercises, we believe, is running a really well-structured competitor simulation exercise. And programs such as Lumanity's competitor room approach are designed to give teams the time and the bandwidth to really immerse themselves in the challenge that they may face. And key to this really is getting teams properly into the mindset of their competitors and allowing them to develop these hypothetical competitive strategies and consider the scenarios and the higher level tactics that they may need, competitors may seek to deliver. Yeah, there's a real benefit in this type of immersion, but careful facilitation is key to make sure that participants can leave behind their company baggage, or to use an American phrase, to avoid them drinking their own Kool-Aid, and to really be able to think like competitors will. When we can make these exercises fun and engagement, they don't have to be dry, boring exercises. When we try to leverage theming, we'll bring in some fun competitive activities, all designed to raise energy levels, to maintain, engagement, to make sure that every function is engaged and contributing based on their speciality, and also really to help with memorability. To your point, walking away with some ideas that we remember and start to execute.
Yeah, and that memorability piece is key. There's that quote, isn't there? The things that people remember are actually the ways you make them feel. So it might seem fairly basic to think about these exercises as fun and themed and so on, but it resonates and it sticks, and we see that. We've spoken about the different frequency and so on, and different ways, depending on the needs, that we can support organisations. But in my view, at the very least, it should be a standard annual occurrence, is to actually invest those couple of days, put your head above your laptop screen, put the burning platforms of today and tomorrow to one side, and do some future planning. Think about what is happening outside of my brand and the bubble that I've been operating in. And I think one of the things that can make organizations nervous, and this is based on some very real conversations I've had, is this kind of challenge of, well, what does that mean for my current plan? I'm executing my current plan and I'm now trying to plan for the future. And again, it's not about current priorities or your existing brand strategy just being thrown out the window, but it is an opportunity to pressure test the steps down the path that you're taking. What needs to be upweighted? Where is there greater urgency needed? What can we perhaps get rid of? The strategy is always as much about what you don't do as what you do. So sometimes there is a nervousness that this type of exercise is just about adding more stuff to the list of things to do, but that isn't the case. It's about being able to make sure you are, in fact, investing in the right things.
Yeah, we're very much aware that global teams have got a lot on their plate, and competitive readiness is one element. Therefore, we have to be pragmatic. It's not always going to be possible to dive into every potential evolution of the landscape or every bit of new competitive data, but that doesn't take away the importance of competitive readiness. And just another thing to think about, in addition to some of the programs we've already discussed, it can be important to think proactively and schedule activity around these key potential competitive events. Examples would be where we've supported teams to prepare or develop rapid responses to competitive congress activity. We all know these big congresses are coming up. If we expect the competitors to do something significant, let's spend some time thinking about that in advance. If there's new data coming out, be ready for that. So we've helped to support them in identifying either before or after the event, near-term implications, and to quickly turn around a cross-functional action plan so that the organization is prepared to manage and mitigate some of these almost expected potential competitive threats. And that can be just something as simple as really just developing that elevator pitch, that really succinct competitive narrative that can be delivered by sales teams, company-facing staff, to make sure there's consistent communication in response to the competitive action.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We keep coming back to this idea of simplicity and pragmatism because it is so essential in making this resonate and making it work. And as alluded to earlier, this is not about throwing existing plans out the window or adding to them so they become overwhelming and non-pragmatic in the context of the day-to-day. We don't work in a world where everything, is perfectly lined up before we develop a new campaign. There are going to be unknowns. There are there's going to be ambiguity because things are just happening in parallel. So it wouldn't be appropriate to throw everything out the window because it's not the reality of how you're needing to structure workflows and so on. So it's not about reinventing the wheel because of an external environment change. So you've got to keep the core of your own asset or brand strategy. There's a real importance around that repeated nature, really, of a sort of strategic core. It may well be that actually we gain insights that allow us to communicate that in a slightly nuanced way. And we can then retain the core, but have the opportunity to move the needle. And that's what competitive readiness is all about, right? When you're trying to defend existing market share or you're trying to gain traction in a market as quickly as possible. So you can't ignore this, otherwise you're not going to move the needle. It's not about reinventing the wheel each time, but it is going to be a determinant of how successful brands are in this increasingly competitive environment where everyone's fighting for the same space. So we just have to plan better ultimately and appropriately in response to these very real challenges in the world we're operating in today.
Yeah, what a fascinating discussion. And the thing that I wanted to ask you guys about here is you leave one of these workshops or one of these sessions, and you've got maybe, let's just say we reduce it to two things that the team really thinks can happen, hypotheticals. How do you go and test for those, right? Do you guys help with that part of it? If something feels very real and they decide to maybe do more with that, has that ever happened to you? And how do you address that?
So you mean two conflicting priorities or prioritization of kind of key actions? I mean, because the answer to both would in fact be yes. So I think,
Yeah.
as I say, there can often be a tendency to add things to the mix. And part of the collaboration and the facilitation of those discussions is to challenge teams to prioritize so that it doesn't get lost in the day-to-day and it doesn't not happen. But equally, part of, Sandy mentioned this scenario piece and sort of prediction of the future earlier, part of the process that we would take teams through is to think about what is most likely and then what are the triggers to indicate that actually this new world is emerging or this new world is emerging, and what do you then have to pivot to put in place additionally or pivot and stop doing. So I think both of those elements are important.
And further to your point, I think we shouldn't just deliver the workshop and then a report goes on a shelf and nothing much happens as a result. We're very happy to continue to work with organizations to come back in a 3 or 4 months' time and say, what does the world look like? This can be done very quickly. What does the world look like now? Where have you got to in terms of execution of the plan? And we can, in a way, help to be like an external policeman that provides that pressure to get things done in a way because, hey, if you know the guys are coming back, we better do something. Great. Hopefully a positive process.
For sure. That accountability helps all of us, for sure. Appreciate the detail there. Sometimes you leave these things and you're like, wow, I didn't think about this in this way. This is probably something we should prioritize. It seems companies have a lot of options in the right support for these challenges. But before we wrap, I firstly want to just say thank you both. It's been an incredible learning experience chatting with both of you. Is there anything else you want to add or share with the audience on this topic?
I am going to make a very simple statement, and that's this is important. Readiness is a critical part of the business, and make time for it. Protect the time, invest in it. Busy teams, you're going to have to carve out the time. I think, because as discussed in the first episode, developing a brand or portfolio strategy without proper reference to that emerging competitive landscape can often be a recipe for failure, particularly in that far more dynamic, more competitive market that most companies find themselves in. And my final thought is try to make this a dynamic and ingrained behavior. So alluding back to things I think we discussed earlier, this shouldn't just be a once-a-year tick box exercise. The more we can make this a living process within the organization, the more constantly ready that organization will be to face external threats.
Yeah, and I think very similarly, but for me, I think there's 3 things. One is have it on the annual agenda, at least, and invest in the right approach. It can be quick turnaround actions, can be Salesforce training, these competitor rims, deep dives, whatever is right, but it should be top of the list as far as I'm concerned in annual planning. And recognize the power of simplicity. We saw that we kept coming back to that theme. So that's fundamental throughout the process and how it's executed. Don't over intellectualize it. That's when it becomes daunting and overwhelming and too reliant on process and framework. It has to be about action that's going to be taken and the impact of that action. So measuring that, as Sammy said earlier, we can come back and see what's been done. That's the important part. And then lastly, I think even in the first episode, I was talking a lot about the human behavior piece, but that's it. It really is about engagement from the global kind of core brand team right the way through to customer facing team. That threat is understood, that the action they're going to take is clear, and that there's commitment and follow through. So yeah, those three things really. Prioritize it, be simple, and focus on the mindset and engagement of the organization.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Sandy, for those wrapping thoughts on this very important topic. If folks wanted to learn more, where can they reach out to you or the organization?
We're very happy for anyone to reach out to us. Your email address, super easy, first name dot surname at lumanity.com. Obviously, we have the corporate website, and we'd be delighted to have an exploratory chat with anyone who's felt that something's resonated out of this in terms of their own internal process.
Outstanding, Sandy. Thank you. Folks, thank you for tuning in to this two-part series on competitive readiness with our guest experts, Zoe Brown and Sandy Richardson. In the show notes, you're going to find all the ways to get in touch with both of them individually, as well as the company at Lumanity. So make sure you do something about that. Make the priority, put it in your calendar, take the next steps. They're here to help you. Sandy, Zoe, thank you guys so much for being with us.
Pleasure,
Thank you.